I've got this clock to repair, and it's a question of rebushing the bearings. Normally you just press them out and put in one of these little ones, just press them in and rebush them and broach the hole to the right size. But if you look at this one, this hole here, it's not in the middle, and that means I've got to put a blank plug in there and then drill the hole, but it has to be in the right place, and that means I need a depthing gauge, which I don't have, so I'm going to have to make one. Now normally they're made in fairly thick brass, but I don't have any. So I'm going to make them in steel, and this is the frame, 2mm thick steel, cut on the CNC mill, and I hate cutting mild steel on CNC. It's horrible stuff to work, but these work just like that as a hinge, and the gears will be suspended between the 2 points, one in each side, and then they're brought together until they mate properly, and then you've got the distance. Anyway, that should become more obvious when we get to the next stage. And the next stage is to hinge the two together. This is a setup for soldering the hinge together. I've cut it into 5 equal pieces, and theoretically I'm going to solder these 3 to this side and these 2 to that side. And what I've done is I've placed little pieces of solder in there, high melting point solder, so that I can, if necessary, if it hasn't gone through, I can turn it over and use a lower melting point the other side. This higher melting point silver solder is a bit reluctant to flow, but it seems to be alright. Got a bit of a gap in that one that'll need doing, but we'll see what it cleans up like. I've made 4 of these from a piece of hex, 2mm slot to fit over the end of the steel bar to make sure they're in line. And they're a reamed fit for the steel rods to go through. Quite a simple job. I've still got to drill a hole and tap a thread in there for a little screw to tighten up to clamp on the steel bars, and then silver solder them in place. To ensure they're in straight line, I've inserted the rod. When I solder it on, that should keep them dead in line. There won't be any warping because the metal's too thick for that.
I'm not sure what this silver solder is. I've had it in stock for a long time, and it's always seems to be a higher melting point than my usual, and it's rather reluctant to flow.
It's coming together now. I've got these little screws, knurled ends, and I've made the 4 supports with a pointed end obviously for marking, and the other end, this little centerpiece here, I've used an engraving cutter here, a 60-degree one, which cuts down to virtually a point, so that will support even the narrowest of spigots. I've assembled it the wrong way round here just to check the alignment, and it's pretty good. I'm happy with that. So the whole thing at the moment is coming together quite nicely. I've now got to make the piece at the bottom here, which will adjust the spacing between, which needs to be accurate. So that's quite a complex little piece to make, and we'll see what happens. It's all looking a bit tatty at the moment because it's in steel, and these discoloured pieces are where I've been experimenting with plating, a bit of copper plating, and whether I'm going to plate it with brass or copper or nickel or something like that, we'll see what happens. The method of adjusting the gap between the two sides is quite simple. It's a little piece like so with a clamp, and this will be the adjuster. And this is the opposite side. It's simply riveted on. This will go through, and I can just screw the pieces together, and that will adjust the gap, and I've got adjustment here to allow for the different angle. Well, that's just about it. Final assembly to be done. But basically, it's just a question of screwing this to get the spacing correct. The only thing at the worry really at the moment is that it is still free to do that, and ideally it would be better if it were under tension. But I did think of fixing a plate on that side, but it's always on a changing angle, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, it needs a good clean up now, and a final assembly. Well, it's completed now. I can't say the plating was a success. It didn't work very well with the brass. It turned out to be more like bronze. Whether the zinc in the brass didn't plate, I don't know. Anyway, what I've ended up by doing is copper plating it. And if I'd taken a lot more trouble over the finish, like polishing the steel and so on, I would have had quite a nice finish. But where the steel is of a reasonable finish, you can see the copper is quite good. Still, that's not what I was after really. That was just a sideline. Simple knob on there to turn, adjusts it. It could do with a spring, perhaps a weakish spring in between. I can adjust that now till it's nice and free running. That's all I needed the machine for. Now I can use this distance to mark out on the clock where the point should be, where I should drill my hole. For a quick job, it didn't take long to make really. Quite pleased. It's not going to win any prizes, but that's not what the object was. Just to make a tool which would do the job in a quick time.